Okay, so the idea here was to try and make the most of the planning workbench. It's one of the base tools that come out of the system, and it serves a real important purpose inside of the Epicor application. And quite often, it's a place where festering issues go to hide. And if you're not using it, some of those issues may not uh, bring themselves to the fore, and you might end up discovering what we call sometimes the hidden factory. Now in lean, the hidden factory is representative quite often of a lot of the extra activities that are being done, most often non-value added, that occur within a manufacturing operation. And within that, there's a certain amount of the hidden factory that I see quite often has to do with manual workarounds to things that could be system-based but aren't due to whatever factors. And what I see quite often is there are places where manufacturing runs into issues and they learn how to bypass them without communicating to anyone, and they just go and they do what they know they need to do to make the right product or deliver the right goods, and these issues go unaddressed, and over time these get larger and larger, such that when you get to the point where you actually try to re-implement a system, it quite often exposes the hidden factory. And I found many customers kind of get to that point where they're, oh wow, I did not realize I had so many different issues going on because these had all just sort of slipped through the cracks. Um, and the planning workbench then is a great tool for capturing those items. It's kind of the crack that captures everything. And then if you have that ability to take those items that have fallen into the cracks and flush them out, it gives you some tools to try to resolve and address them accordingly. Now, the problem sometimes with the planning workbench is its usability, and I find there's some things that you can do, just simple things in terms of understanding the different fields and their usage and the logic of the tool that can help you make the most of it. So that's the intent of this session, is to try and work through that. And so really, it all starts with the idea of supply and demand, right? On the one side, you have various forms of demand that are driving the needs to get goods into the factory, whether it is you're making them, purchasing them, performing some combination of manufacturing and subcontracting to address the demand coming through your area, be it a sales order, be it customer forecast, be it kind of inventory requirements that you have in order to meet customer needs. I had a customer just the other day, they vary their items. They have build to order products, and then they have what they call French fries. And I said, well, why do you call them French fries? And there's stuff, well, there's a stuff that when a customer comes to us, they just expect them to be on the shelf and ready to hand off. So they have what they call French fry parts. I thought that was a nice analogy. You have job material requirements, of course, that are generating dependent demand that need to be acted on. And so you have on the other side, we have the planners and the buyers, and in some companies, buyer planners. If you're cross-trained, I pity those poor folks, but I've met a couple of them who are managing the purchasing and the planning activities to get work in front of the factory so that they can meet the different types of supply or demand that are coming through. So that said, the planning workbench is a great tool for trying to keep the supply and demand in balance, because we understand that a well-tuned ERP system runs, you have supply on one side and demand on the other, but there are always things pulling at that teeter-totter and pulling things in one way or another. And if those things aren't well understood and well discovered and well communicated, those can create some challenges, ultimately leading into things like underproduction or overproduction, missed shipments, underutilization of resources. And it all starts in the planning workbench with what are called part suggestions. There's a table behind the system called the part sug table. It's one of my favorite little things to query day in and day out. That's where all of these issues are getting collected. And inside of an ERP system, there's a general idea. You have the kind of generic industry term exception messages. And these are messages that the ERP system is sending to tell you that you should take some sort of action based on the parameters that have been defined on the system and the system's logic itself. And in the planning workbench, these take those part suggestions and they collect them. And so these suggestions could be one of many things. Some of them might be basic demand-based jobs, make direct situations, where you need to create a job that's come from a sales order in a make direct situation. One might be the need to create jobs to supply products where something went wrong. Let's say MRP does its normal processing, and MRP in Epicor, when it processes demand, it will create supply records that are unfirm MRP jobs. And these unfirm jobs sit out there, and they can be captured by a planner scheduler and converted and firmed up into jobs that we're actually going to execute. And if they're not, the next time MRP runs, it'll regenerate those. But when it runs into issues, it may discover, oh boy, something didn't happen correctly, and I'm not able to create an unfirm job as planned. So I need to stick that in a place where someone can act on it and chase down what the issue is. And we're going to kind of walk through a couple of those different situations and give you an idea of what some of those might look like. It also, when things change, orders get canceled, orders get pushed out, quantities change, it gives suggestions for the planner to now come and take those suggestions and manipulate them accordingly. And so one question that I've had people ask has to do with, well, does everything fall on the planning workbench? And that really depends on the modules you've licensed and the processes you're going through. If you're in a world that's pure job shop and everything is direct, it's either a make direct material or it's made to order against the sales order. Well, then you'll see a lot of stuff falling into the planning workbench, especially if you haven't licensed MRP, because then the planning workbench is your jumping off point for creating supply records. If you have a system where MRP is running and most of your parts are flagged for MRP processing, well, then much of this will bypass the planning workbench, and you'll hopefully only getting the helpful exception messages that you need to try to correct the issues as they come up. So one question right out of the gate, well, what exactly generates a part suggestion? And this is a twofold answer to the one part question. And that is, there are kind of two different ways that part suggestions get created in the system. One is just the MRP process itself running, reviewing all the parts in the system, then going back and throwing any exceptions, any errors, or any messages that need to be made there for changes and throwing those into the planning workbench. Now, there's another way that things fall dynamically into the planning workbench, and I call those trigger-based changes. And those have to do more so with any kind of direct situation where you have, for example, make direct sales orders or changes to make direct job materials. I'm going to go ahead here and I'm going to do a little bit of bouncing back and forth between my PowerPoint and some just basic demonstrations. So I'm going to go and let's go ahead and look at an MRP sales order. And we're going to look at the situation where a sales order was processed by MRP. All right, and so I created a number of different parts in the system for this sales order. And in our case, no. MRP must have run and killed that one on me. I apologize. Situation that I was going to look to was one where a part had a inactive revision and MRP generated a suggestion for that. Oh, that would be. Let's do this. There's a reason that job's not there. Let me pull up the planning workbench. And let me go ahead and do a search. When I am searching for things through the planning workbench, I like to use the sort by. Allows me to go by part number, which quite often can be helpful. All right, so here is a new suggestion. And this suggestion is based on, oh, sorry, question came here, what version is Brad using? And I will tell you now from my help, I'll go to About. or how we used to say it in Canada, a boot, and I am on 600. So that is a nice new version, lots of good fun tools popping up in there, playing in 600 for the first time in a while, running into some screens that have been rebuilt with the kinetic interface and having a little bit of a holy cow moment, just trying to get my bearings as to what has changed. But oh, thank you for the question. So here's an example of the sales order that I had. This suggestion was created by MRP, and it ran into a case where a specific part did not have a suggestion. So I have, or did not have a approved revision. So we have created, as a result, a part suggestion that we need to go and create a job for this item. Now, we'll walk through this a little later and talk through what the steps might entail to resolving these issues for why these things are falling into the planning workbench. Now, we will go ahead and what I'll actually do here, I'm going to create a new order entirely. And give it to my favorite customer, Addison. Been adding customers to adding orders to Addison now for probably 10 or more years. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and create an order, and I'm going to create a sales order line for a given part. And we'll make this for 10 pieces. If we come to, go ahead and save this, you can see the dates defaulted down from the header. Dates are always a big thing in the Epicor system. And you'll see here that this part was a non-stock part, so it flagged make direct. So this is a really important point inside of the system, because a make direct demand link will tell the system that, oh, okay, we need to make a part or a job specifically to satisfy this sales order. And as a result, this will create a part suggestion in the planning workbench. I'm going to go ahead and add another one here, because this one is actually a little bit more fun. Didn't like that. There we are. Fat fingers foiled again. All right, so this is another part that is going to be a make direct item. What makes this part a little fun here, I'll take just a side step here very briefly. And I will open part entry, and we'll jump into the method here really quickly. And we'll jump into the method tracker for this item. There we are. All right, so we have some materials for this item. And this part here, I've looked up this part, and this part in the part maintenance screen happens to itself be a non-stock item. So as we see, this part here is a non-stock item, and as such, when that exists in the bill of material of this parent part, it will generate a suggestion to actually make the part. So we will jump into sales order entry, and we'll go ahead. We've saved this item. We have it flagged as make direct. We'll go now into the planning workbench and find that part. Okay, so we got a couple of suggestions here. I'll quickly grab these. Okay, so for this order, 86-2-1, this was the sales order that I had just created. All right, I have a suggestion now to create or link to an existing job. So this was created dynamically as opposed to MRP creating it when I entered that order. If I was a planner, I could go ahead and, well, you could do a couple of things. If this part is set to have MRP process it, you could wait for MRP to create an unfirmed job for you. If you have reason that you need to get this into manufacturing pronto, you could jump straight into the order job wizard, for instance, another one of Epicor's kind of hidden tools, and we can go ahead and schedule and create this job. And we will know we are done when we see a little new job item come down below. All right, so we've created job 2431. We're going to go ahead and go into that job just to have a look at it here very quickly, because this is an interesting point here. Okay, so we have a job, and now this job has been scheduled. Oh, I'm sorry. Epicor, when you launch the order job wizard from the planning workbench, it likes to freeze you up. One of those, what do we call those? Undocumented features of the software. All right, so now we come and we look at the job mom for this item. We'll see that this one material happens to be flagged make direct. Now, what we will discover now is that if we go back into the planning workbench, just as that sales order, that make direct release on the sales order created this suggestion, we'll see now that a suggestion exists for that same job material. So now we see we have items that are for a job, and we'll see that the part and the related job is 2431 was the job I had just created. So they have the same suggestion here. You need to now go ahead and create a job for that item. Now here, I could say that in some cases, I could go into the order job wizard and create that part. In other cases, I could launch Job Manager for this part. This is a fun little tool, and I'd say this one wins the sweepstakes for the most confusing tool inside of Epicor. I've had more than a few customers come to me and just in befuddlement try to understand, well, now can you explain the Job Manager to me? And I say, well, boy, well, that's a 3-beer question, and I'm no drinks in yet, so we're going to have to lay out the tablecloth and talk through this one. But suffice it to say, one of the things that's great about the Job Manager is you could go ahead and create the job from directly from here and get details and go through those processes. You can also go ahead and link it to an existing supply record, so that you are just double dipping on an existing job that's out in the system. Or you can do what's kind of fun here and choose to pull this from stock. So to pull from stock, you're telling the system, oh, I don't want to actually make a job from this. I might have on-hand inventory, and in this case, this is a perfect example. I see a lot of folks in mixed mode world who normally will make stuff to order, but occasionally, for whatever reason, overruns or canceled orders, they'll find that they have some of these parts in stock. And in that case, they'd always want to consume that stock before they would jump and make some new stuff. So we'll go ahead and we'll flag that to pull from stock. It asks you that if you are sure, so we'll go ahead and do that. Okay, so now we go ahead and if we come out of here and go back to that original job that we had opened. All right, you will remember that that material was flagged make direct. We'll go ahead and refresh, and now that part is no longer make direct. Now we're going to take that part and issue it just as a regular stocked material from inventory. So the basic gist of all of this was that when you are working in the system, you have the ability to see direct work suggestions immediately jump into the planning workbench. If you're working with make direct items, you would have to wait for MRP to generate those for you. Let me return to. All right. So understanding the planning workbench, a lot of it has to do with the key fields. And there are a lot of fields in the default grid layout that are not displayed by default. And I find that if you put those out there, you can save yourself a lot of trouble when you're sorting and organizing things to help with that. And we'll start with one of these, which is the source field. In the grid itself, it's the 4. And this indicates what's called the demand type. So it tells you right away if this is a make to order, a make to job, or a make to stock suggestion. So any given suggestion is related to only one type of demand. And interestingly enough, if it's for an order, it'll have all of the related order line and release information available. If it's for a job, it'll have the job, the assembly, and the material sequence for it. And if it's for stock, it'll include the warehouse. Another field here that is really important to understand is the target job versus the source job. Now, inside of the planning workbench, there are 2 different job fields, and these can get kind of confusing at times. So try to make a point of delineating between those when you're working through these. So the target job number is essentially, that's the job that Epicor is telling you to do something to. Okay, so Epicor looks at this job and says, you need to expedite it, or you need to postpone it, you need to increase or decrease the quantities, or you need to do something else to this job. Now, if this job is empty, that implies that we have the need to actually create a job. Now, the source job is the job that only is applicable to make to job situations. Now, we had just gone through a situation there where we had a make direct job material. And if you have a situation where a source job is driving demand, that'll be populated along with its related fields. And probably most importantly, and I'll spend a fair bit of the rest of the session here talking about type and subtype. So each suggestions will have a 2-tier type structure. It'll have a type, and then underneath that it'll have some additional subtype. And now at Epicor, what's kind of unfortunate is Epicor's own search tool on the planning workbench is a little more vanilla than that. It's a little more generic. It says, well, you're either searching for new suggestions or change suggestions. The truth is that change suggestions, there's a lot to a change suggestion. Now, the change suggestion will actually encompass a number of different types. These could be date changes, they could be quantity changes, they could be just general changes, and we'll run into a couple of scenarios of that, or they could be outright cancellations. So let me get out of here and walk through the planning workbench here and just talk to some of that. And I'll start by just selecting everything. So as I had said, when you say status, well, they'll show you changes in new, which is not entirely indicative of the kind of data you're dealing with. So I'll go ahead and search. I'm going to pull in, looks like we have around 50 suggestions out there right now since our last MRP run. Oh, did it not take everything? This is better. All right, something I like to do when I'm in pretty much any grid view is I like to turn on the grid filters, because this helps me as a processor, as a data processor, to kind of sift through and sort out the wheat from the chaff. In a lot of environments, there are certain suggestions that would be more important than others. I would say probably the least important might be like a postponed suggestion, whereas the most important might be a discrepancy that is existing. So if we see here, we talked about the 4 field in one of our previous slides. Everything is either for a job, an order, and it looks in our case that we only have job and order, or it could be for stock. This also has a nice calculated field where it gives you some of the consolidated information in one field, so that this order suggestion is for sales order 5309-2-1, which is kind of a helpful way of understanding right away what you're dealing with. And as we were talking, the types, all right, so there could be new, they could be a cancel suggestion, it could be a change suggestion, or it could be a date suggestion. There are a number of different kinds of suggestions. We'll just kind of sift through these here real quickly. We got new is your most common, I would say, in most cases, and your information here will always be the same. Create job or link to existing job, and that could be through the job manager as we had discussed. Now, unfortunately, this doesn't always indicate why you need to create this manually versus doing it, letting MRP do it for you. And that's where some of the issue handling can be helpful there. I'll talk about date suggestions. You can see within date suggestions, we have types, we have P and we have X. So P is for postpone suggestions, and X is for expedite suggestions. So in some cases, Epicor will look at the plan and it'll look and say, oh, well, you need to expedite this job in order to hit a new date, or you need to postpone a job because say a sales order pushed out, you don't need to make that anymore. So you might have reason to push that job out and not have to work on it like you had been. And then there are change suggestions. These are interesting when they come up and you have a situation where the job and the order might conflict. In our case, we might have some sort of conflict here that we would need to jump into. And then cancel. These sometimes exist when something outright needs to be canceled because there are no existing requirements left. We'll have a look at some of those. Okay, so let's talk through new suggestions, and let's see just what would drive a new suggestion here. So in our case, we have order 5380. All right, so this part is for this item. If we come now and we look for the part itself, we'll discover that this suggestion was for a part that did not have any approved revisions. So I would say in working with customers, the most common reason that something will fall into the planning workbench will be based on a revision being unapproved or absent altogether. So basically, if the revision is unapproved, Epicor is saying, well, I don't know how you want to make it, so I can't go ahead and create a job for you. The simplest resolution here would be to approve that part and get that item moving forward. We go ahead and I think rather than maximizing and minimizing here, I'll just keep it as here. So talk through our new suggestion. Another type of suggestion then is a cancellation suggestion. So let's go through and look at 5378, see what happened with this case. Okay, so in this scenario, we had an order, it got canceled, but we had already gone out and created a job for it. So we have a job for this part. And then if we come back to now the planning workbench, we can see for this part. I'll go ahead and, sure enough, I already have the part out there. So release has been canceled, remove outstanding production. So a couple of different ways we could go ahead and do that. The job manager's as good a tool here as any. All right, so we found that we have this job for this item. Now it has, can go ahead and I think if we try to delete this job, it might stop us because it has a demand link still, right? So we might have to just launch this in job entry and remove the demand link. One of the pesky things about demand links is when you have a make to order or a make to job demand link, it won't let you just whack the thing. It makes you delete that demand link first. And knock that off. that off as well. All right, so we'll jump out of this one and we'll close out of here. Now that job went away from the job manager. Now the one challenge here, and I will say this with I've seen this with many customers, they'll say, well, I processed this, but the thing stays. And I've seen mixed behavior inside of the planning workbench in terms of removing that suggestion immediately from your grid. It might be removed at the database level, but it may not actually be, it may still be residing in your grids. Sometimes you find yourself having to manually remove those after you've processed them. We get down to another example here of, we got through cancel suggestions. So change suggestions. This is one where you have a situation that you have to change something outright. So we'll go and we will launch order 5377. All right, so in this case, we have a order and we go down, it's for part 06, and we come down to its job and we open that job up right away. I'll just show you what that scenario might look like here. All right, so this is for a part 05. So what you've seen here is Epicor gives us the ability to change the part numbers after you've entered the order. So you've entered the order, you've already created a job for it. Someone can go back in the order and change the part number. Let's say a customer calls you and says, hey, well, you know, I ordered part 05, but really now I want part 06. So the order entry person comes in and enters this as part 06. Now, if your planner isn't watching the planning workbench to see that, oh, wow, I still am planned to make an 05 and the part now has changed to an 06, they may go ahead and make the wrong part. This is especially true if you're in a situation where the emails aren't flowing cleanly or you have too many emails and people are missing them. This is a tool there to catch those kinds of changes. It's very similar in a lot of ways to a cancellation. It's a way of saying, you know, this is a tool for getting down to the shop floor and telling your shop floor, hey, something changed significantly. We'll have to go now and make that change. I'll go ahead and go back to the planning workbench. All right, and you'll see here when a change suggestion shows itself, it'll be a part rev conflict. All right, so it'll give you the part here that it should be now. And this allows you, there's a couple of ways you could go ahead and change this. One would be to jump straight in the target job. One would be to go into job manager. Let's go into job manager here. All right. And go into job entry. And so now we can change this part from an 05 to an 06. So now that discrepancy will no longer exist in the system. All right. So we come now to the next type, date suggestions. So date suggestions come in one of two types. X for expediting a job, or P for the postponement of a job. I'm going to go ahead and go into our sample order here and talk through that a little bit. All right, so let's say we're in a sales order. Oh, didn't like that order. That's probably because I typed it wrong. I'm always thankful that I'm a consultant and not a typist. If I was a typist, I would have been fired on the first day. So let's say with a line here, we have a sales order line that's due for a given day. And let's say that the dates on that pushed out radically. He said, oh, customer calls and says, oh boy, I can't do this. This needs to happen now. First of the new year. All right, so we go ahead and they go ahead and they update that so that it applies to the lower lines. And the planner then, who running the planning workbench, comes in the morning. Comes in the morning. Let's take all again. And they come, they go looking for suggestions. For sake of brevity, I'm going to look for one specific to this part number itself. All right, we'll see we have all right, so for this part here, now it's going to say, oh, we have a change suggestion. Oh. This is interesting. I think I had pushed out, so I should have seen a postpone suggestion, but it's actually seeing a expedite. That's a little interesting. I wasn't actually expecting that. I'm going to give myself another chance here to push this out. See if we can't get the system to reconcile what we were doing here. All right, so now we have on the release, even now we have, this is set. Oh, it did not push down. That's interesting. That might be my source of my problem. Oh, we change our ship by, need by dates out. Okay, so now we come back to our planning workbench. Search for that part in question. All right, now we have, there we go, we have a postpone suggestion. So it's saying the earliest due date should be 1/1 now instead of our previous date that was in October. Now, similarly, go ahead and clean that record up. An expedite suggestion could be the very opposite, that a customer could come and say, well, you know, I said I needed it in 2 weeks. Truth is, I need it right away. So in that case, we might find ourselves with a so now we find a recommendation to expedite. Now, one thing interesting to note is that it's within the planning fence and there is schedule in time. So that's an important couple of notes here that we'll want to make while I have just a few minutes here. I always think my presentations aren't going to last long enough, and then I find myself going a little too long. So we'll talk about that in just a second here. And then the quantity. So a quantity change may be a very similar sort of situation where you've made a change to a sales order and now that cascades downstream. So if we go ahead and open this line, and we had it for 20, the customer now says, oh, I need it for 30. But as you realize, on the release, we have a job already. Oh, we didn't for this one. So then that won't give us a problem then. I need one here that actually had a job. Let me go ahead then and do this. Go ahead, actions. We'll create this through the order job wizard. We'll go the other way. All right, so we have a job out there now to make 30 of these. Now the customer calls and says, oh, I'm sorry, I really just needed 10. And so the order entry person makes the change. all is well. But then where do we know in the system that we need to make that change? Well, this falls into the purview of the planning workbench. And now we get a reduce quantity request. Okay, so it's of a type of reduce. And what it says, this part degrees production down to 10. So this is now telling the system, hey, we have something here that changed. It has all your linking information if you need to actually go out and find that. And now you can go and make that change accordingly so you don't overproduce. So I had talked here briefly about the planning time fence and some of the other key areas out there that can be helpful. I'll open up a couple of forms here. So if what I see with a lot of folks, they will get these suggestions, and what they'll discover is they get many more than they want. And the question comes up, well, do we really want to see all these suggestions? You get all these exception messages, and people stop after a while actually listening to the messages as they're coming through. So one key way is to try and build processes in your system that minimize some of those exception messages if they're not the kind of messages that you're really going to address. So let's say like a postpone suggestion. If you have something that's already been released to production and they're working on it, most factories that I've worked with, they don't want to change a job that's already entered manufacturing, unless it's something like they have to decrease quantity. For anything else, they're going to say, okay, we're going to make these parts, we're going to finish this production run. We don't want the disruption for the shop floor. What you can do in those cases, there are two things that you can lock on a job. One is the quantity, and the other is the schedule. And what I've seen a number of customers do, will create a little BPM for them where when they release that job, so when that job status turns to release, it locks either the scheduling or the quantity flag, or maybe it checks both of them, so that now this item is a firm and locked job, and now MRP will suggest something else. So if it says, okay, you need to make extra, well, it'll create a new job for you to have to do that. Excuse me. So that's one way that you can handle the minimizing of too many suggestions, is just through kind of business process policy of when do I actually want to lock a given job. One other way, before I wrap myself up here, is on the part sites tab itself. There are a number of attributes that you can define on a given part beyond the planning time fence and the reschedule out and in delta. These help limit the number of change suggestions you'll get. So the reschedule out and in are specifically for postpone and expedites suggestions. So the idea is if the suggestion is within 5 days, if the change is within 5 days, ignore. All right, I don't want to deal with this because it's a small change, it's not worth it. If you are working with planning time fence, this works more in terms of the quantities. If you want to have the planning time fence consider the quantity changes for that given part. So I would say these are the areas where I've seen customers dial in some of their part settings so that they don't experience so much noise. This is quite the same with purchase change suggestions, to try and eliminate some of that extra noise that gets in the way of these processes from helping the customers do their thing. So that being said, I think I'm pretty much at the end of my presentation, the end of my time. So I want to thank everyone for your time. And if you have any questions right away, we can field these quickly before we head to a break.